Thank you, Rossa. And to build upon Ross's thoughts on the new ways of hiring, we first must consider who we are as employers today, what we stand for as employers today, and most importantly, why employees should choose us over this new world of opportunity that's being presented to them today. In many ways, our next story is a story of hypergrowth, a story of intense contraction, but ultimately a story of compassion. And I'm thrilled to be joined by Q Hamirani, who's the Global Head of People Operations at Airbnb, to explore the evolving nature of the employer value proposition and this war for hearts, minds, and experience. Welcome, Q.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me. Excited
Great to see you. Great to see you, Q, and thanks for joining us. Q,
sure thing.
I think in order to look forwards at your thinking at Airbnb around how your employer value proposition is evolving, I think it's important to compare and to contrast it to where it came from. And knowing some of your story, Q, where you come from, you joined Airbnb to set up the global people operations in 2018. And I think one of your first tasks was actually to build a recruitment team of some 300 people. And you led the doubling of the organization from 3,000 employees to 6,000 employees. Could you give us some insights and thinking that you had at the time, knowing that you're very people-centric, and the resources, the practices, and the systems that you used to scale at such pace while not compromising the human experience of your folks, Q?
Yeah, definitely. I think as I look back and reflect, I think one of the biggest things for me was actually taking the first few months when I joined Airbnb to really understand what had brought us to the point where we were in terms of our story, our values, our DNA, why were we at a place where we needed to scale and had not got there yet already. And once I kind of took the first few months to understand that, it actually enabled me to understand better who we were, and that would be engraved in everything we did, but also to create a roadmap to basically figure out how can we scale going forward. And as I look through, everyone has learnings, and one of my key learnings at Airbnb, which was unique to Airbnb from some of my prior experiences, was that Airbnb was and still is a creative company at heart. We challenge process, we challenge regulations, and if we were not that at our core DNA, we would not be changing the world today in ways that we are, because of our the nature of our business and how we were born. So hence, this actually translated to the fact that our core DNA was not focused on operational efficiency, but it was extremely focused on the experiential components of being human-centric, making sure we did the best for everyone we engaged with, be it a host, be it an employee, be it a guest, to the large extent. And this mindset essentially not only was the DNA of our company, but also had translated to the HR function at the time. So hence, when I was brought in, it helped me understand why my role was so critical, why we had got there, why we were not operationally efficient. It wasn't. It was these were some of the reasons. So once I kind of understood that, to your point, our recruiting team, which is not under people ops, but it's a separate organization in our employee experience / HR function, they had geared up and were hiring a couple hundred recruiters, or had hired at the time, to really take us from 3,000 to 6,000 employees within a year. And to your point, our secret sauce, if you will, at Airbnb to keeping our high level of employee experience was our amazing onboarding experience into the Airbnb family once a candidate signed an offer and the first week, and we go through that process, because that really sets the stage and foundation for their entire employee journey. So one of the things that I looked at was, once I understood who we were, why we had got there, where we want to go, and how we want to go forward, which included keeping our core DNA and secret sauce, I was able to look at, I sat back and looked at the employee journey across, from the time a candidate signed an offer to the time they actually left us. What was the employee journey processes. And we were able to look at what are the touch points in this employee journey that we can scale using technology, process optimization, but would not impact the employee experience negatively, and in some ways actually enhance the experience. So, I'll give you an example, because it's always good to relate to an example. One of the processes when I was looking at was auditing our offer letter process, which means when a candidate signs an offer letter and you hire them into your system, you have to make sure you audit all the components, including all the compensation elements, so you're actually paying them right. You're granting them the right equity that was agreed to in the offer letter and such. And these are things that not only have a financial impact directly on an individual, but can really set the stage for a positive or negative experience if things are not set up right. So if I don't get paid right away on my first check, that's not gonna build on the employee experience. So we looked at it and we said, at the time our start classes were under 10 a week when I joined. And my team was looking and doing a very thorough audit, but in a very manual fashion. So they literally had a PDF up on one screen of the offer letter. We had our Workday HRIS tool, and they would map it all out. Well, we realized that with our hyper growth coming down the pipeline, we were going to have over 100 new hires every week. And what we were doing in a very painful way to keep our experiential components intact was not going to be doable at that scale. So we looked at tools. We looked at a reporting tool. We were using Tableau and still do at Airbnb. And the key here is it doesn't matter what tool. I want to make a point that it's not that Tableau was the solution. It's having the right reporting tool that you can essentially, we married up data from both our systems, Greenhouse for recruiting, Workday for HRIS, and we had the tool do all the comparisons in terms of was the data lining up, and it would highlight ones where they were not, and our team would spend time on those to identify why they were incorrect and how can we fix it before the employee even starts so they don't even notice it. So I think this is an example of one of the key processes at Airbnb, which was onboarding, that we did not want to sacrifice. It was actually, it still is our secret sauce, if you will. And we were able to leverage technology to not only enhance data accuracy, which directly translates to improved employee experience. But a cool byproduct in the process was we also improved our compliance metrics, which in turn down the line a year or so later fed directly into IPO readiness. So it was, I think the key is looking for those touch points where you can leverage technology, because not all touch points can be enhanced with technology. Some do need the human touch. So how do you identify those in your journey? And then you work through and you look at something like an onboarding with using technology, process, training people. So it's the people, process, technology, all hand in hand for an experiential piece. But then look at it and say, where can you enhance a process that helps improve the experience as well as the experience for all stakeholders, internal ops, recruiting, employee experience, compliance, all those things. And then you just kind of keep chipping away. You identify things and you work through it. Sometimes you may not have a slick technology available to you like Tableau, but you find a roadmap. Sometimes it's people in it, depending on the process, and you just kind of chip away through that roadmap and have that mindset. But I think setting the foundation up front of who we are, what we believe in, where we came from, where we want to go, is kind of very critical. And I think after being at Airbnb, I think that was definitely a key part of my success here, because that's not something I had to do in my prior companies relatively.
Yeah, sure. You mentioned experience a lot in that answer, Hugh. And when I think about leadership, I think about it's ultimately how others experience us in our presence. And looking at the leadership in Airbnb, like 3 weeks ago, Brian Chesky announced or offered free accommodation to 20,000 Afghan refugees. What an incredible gesture and what an incredible offer. And I think it reflected the values and I think the leadership of the organization. And it reminded me of real ethical leadership and compassion. And if I look back to the next stage in your journey, I think it also was a moment where he showed immense compassion, but in a very different circumstance. So in early 2020, I think it was, he wrote an open letter and he announced the redundancy of 25% of your folks. You were tasked with executing that cue. How do you think your values stood up during that period? Which do you think supported the organization most during that period? And which do you think were stressed most during that period?
Yeah, so I think I'll just start off by acknowledging, and this will tie into your question as well, that workforce reduction was by far one of the most stressful aspects of my life and my career.
Sure.
And stressful in the sense because we wanted to ensure that we treated all our employees in the most personalized and humane way through this tough time as possible. On the flip side of that, it was also in some ways a rewarding aspect of my career once we got through it and we were able to get through the painful execution to make sure that people got what they needed. I think there's a couple of things you touched on. I think, one is just starting off with the leadership and Brian's open letter. I think transparency and honesty is just key to building trust and helping people understand why we are doing things. His open letter, was very clear on taking ownership of why we're doing this right from the leadership level, and how we were trying to do it in kind of pushing the boundaries, if you will, of workforce reductions, which was relatively untouched, for lack of better words, in a prior context. So sometimes people choose not to address the elephant in the room and just move on with executing a program. And in our case, it's always been let's talk about the why, even though it may not be a pleasant topic and something neither us or people want to hear. So I think you read the open letter that the world saw, but there was a lot that Brian and our leadership team did to host sessions internally to really explain more details to our own employees on why we were going through this. I think that itself set a foundation for individuals like myself to be successful and help execute on a program. And talking about leadership skills, I think, empathy and transparency, by Brian doing that, I was able to be successful. And I don't think it would have been successful all around if the leadership, accountability, and transparency was not the forefront of it. I think coming back to, I think you also asked, what was one of my kind of core values that stretched into the execution. And I think in addition to just resilience to do the right thing and make sure the experience that I keep focusing on was emphasized, I think being humble was really put to test, and something that I'm continuing to build on through my career going forward. And what I mean by that is, we did not know how we were going to do this execution. We did not know how we were going to be able to execute a layoff for over 1,000 individuals globally in a very personalized way. Typically, layoffs, when they're done, or reductions in force, they're very canned in some ways, right? You provide X, Y, Z, and you kind of move forward, and that was the layoff, of layoffs. We wanted to change that, and I think in a lot of ways we have changed the landscape of all companies looking at layoffs in the future by either referencing the open letter, thinking of it from a point of empathy, and I just realized, very quickly in that process, I did not know how to do things and how to execute on certain things. What that translated to me being humble with my team, with my leadership, on saying, hey, we don't know how to do this, but let us figure out a creative solution. Let us test a few solutions, and let's figure out how we can get what we want to do together. A quick example, again, leading on a technology front was, we tricked, quote unquote, Workday, which is our HRIS tool, to do things that it was not meant to do. But we were able to use the engine to provide personalized letters globally to people within 10 minutes. If I had to even have people manually do it, I would need like 65 people over 2 hours. It was just not even possible from a resourcing standpoint. So I think it all comes back to who we are, what we are resilient to do, which is make sure that we treat everyone in the most humane and compassionate way possible, no matter the circumstance. And then you kind of build on the leadership empathy and trust that sets the stage for folks like myself to build
Yeah.
on and execute. And when you wrap all that together, you have something that's a very unfortunate situation. I really hope no one has to go through this in the future, but you look at that and you say, how can we make the best and be there to care and support even after individuals leave? So a quick example in the US is it's pretty standard to give a couple months of healthcare coverage when an individual is
Sure.
laid off or leaves involuntarily, because our healthcare system is very different than the rest of the world. We said, well, we're in a healthcare pandemic, and we gave all our US employees a year of healthcare coverage. And sometimes cost won't make sense, but if you stick to your core values on compassionate, taking care of individuals, just like you referenced on the refugees, that we do this in numerous situations, be it natural disasters or world events, via our programs to help people around the world. That's just who we are,
Yeah,
and
for
that's how
sure.
it all translates through. Yeah.
It's funny, Q, you mentioned empathy a lot.
Yeah.
And I think empathy is one thing, but to act upon that empathy through what you have done. And I know at the time you orientated your recruitment team to act as an outplacement team to support your folks at that time.
Yep.
So it's that
Exactly.
action based upon the empathy that makes you compassionate. And I think that's one thing that does set you guys apart. The next phase in your journey, you then had to prepare for IPO. And I'm sure there was a lot of residue that came with that round of redundancies and probably some reputational damage, perhaps. How did you go about reconnecting your folks, and how did you go about rebuilding that social capital and that reputation at the time to prepare for IPO?
Yep. It was quite an extreme, right? From one end to the other. And, I think in some ways we just continued to stay true to our core values, meaning we stayed engaged with our employees and we tried to keep them informed in alignment with regulations. And, there were blackout periods where we could not share certain information with employees. But at a holistic level, I think sharing the same note I shared. So Brian, for example, had weekly Q&As with our employees throughout the pandemic, and people could ask questions and he would share top of mind thoughts. And what he did in that process, which translated to our organization and our leaders there, was we shared our journey and the business turnaround, right? So some of this you can time, some of this you cannot, but we were fortunate that one of the byproduct of the pandemic later on, kind of maybe in Q3 of 2020, this is post, the worst time of Airbnb in Q2, where world travel had just stopped, was that people were starting to travel a little bit, yes, domestically versus internationally, but they wanted to look for personalized travel destinations, meaning they did not want to go to a large hotel and share elevators and share co spaces, and they were looking for personalized space. What that meant was, all of a sudden, Airbnb actually was put back on the map and in demand, like literally from stopping to now being one of the primary options for travel. And that really translated to our turnaround journey. And to answer your question on building the social capital, yes, Q2 was tough, but the way we were able to rebuild it back was explain how the world was evolving using data, using what we saw, and then helping our employees understand that we are actually now positioned all of a sudden in a really good space, and let's turn this back together. And just the journey of, I think, being through that low and that high together, I think itself built, a byproduct was strong social capital, and people started engaging, and the folks were there through the tough times and saw us. When you come out the other side, it's like looking at, you see the light at the end of that tunnel and you just get recharged across the board. But I think we just did it through a combination of Brian continuing to be engaged, explaining the story, and in turn all the leaders doing that. And we do a lot of things like, a lot of social events, which has been our secret sauce. Yes, we could not do it in person, but we continue to do things virtually, including our IPO day celebrations. Who would have thought like an IPO day celebration is everyone online, right, on Zoom? But we tried to make it creative. Like, we had a whole day of celebrations. We had our Airbnb employees hosting like a talk show, explaining what an IPO process is, walking us through the market when it opened. So you try to, you just got to stay engaged and continue to remember that human connection can continue even if it's in a virtual world, and share your story, share our story with each other. And I think the internal social capital comes as a result of that,
Sure.
and then the external reputation kind of all marries itself. I think you can't time everything, but if you just stay true to what you believe, and hope it'll turn around, it actually does.
No,
In
well
this
said.
case.
Well said. I'm sure if those options vested that day, I'm sure the parties went on till all hours at night, well after the virtual event itself, Q. But Q, it's interesting. It sounds to me that you guys showed up for people when you were needed most. And I think that has recreated a new sense of social capital. If I bring it up to today and where you are today, how do you think your employer value proposition compares to what it was, and what's different about it now?
I think in a lot of ways, the employee value prop, in some ways, it stays the same. It's there, be a host, be the best you can to an employee or a human in that aspect, and continue to focus on experience. Don't sacrifice the experience, even if it's gonna quote unquote kill you in terms of work. And the layoffs was an example of that. I think in some ways it's changed, right? So I think on the face of where it's changed is more the world evolving in terms of where people want to be, where they want to work, how they want to work, and when they want to work, right? So there is the future of work. If I wrap that in, is it synchronous, asynchronous? What time does Q want to work in a day? Where does he want to work? And I think I'll bubble all that up into employee flexibility. I think, yes, there were organizations like us that tried to ensure that we provided as much flexibility as we could, even pre-pandemic. But now it's no longer an option. I think you have to, as a company, and Airbnb or any company, and us included, we have to. The employee value proposition is almost tilted now more to the employee-driven flexibility versus what the organization needs. And we just continue to evolve our employee value proposition, because we know that the world is changing. We're still in a pandemic. Every day things change, and that drives different behaviors. So we want to continue to do that. So a quick example on that note is on flexibility. An evolution of our employee value proposition is, a lot of organizations took the stance. And there's no right or wrong answer here, but a lot of organizations took the stance that employees have to return back to their office location, or they have to come back. And we wanted to try to do our best to support employees in terms of if they wanted to be in a different location and they wanted to actually work from elsewhere, to the extent we were definitely compliant and in the regulatory framework with being a public company. Well, we didn't want to take the easy route and say, just come back to your home office, because for some people that did not make sense, and we wanted to provide the flexibility. So we actually stood up a small team that actually looks at tax treaties between countries that an employee may want to go to temporarily for, say, 3-4 months. Look at, can we actually support that? What is the right documentation followed? And then if the employee wants to go, have that agreement. Hey, you can go to XYZ island or country for X months. And we've done that due diligence in a high touch fashion. Again, we have to spend money on it. We have to stand up a team, and it goes back to the experience with empathy, because an employee wants to go somewhere because they need to, or they want to, for their own personal situation, whatever it may be. And I think flexibility is going to continue to be stretched, and we're continuously surveying our employees, trying to figure out what they want, and evolving our employee value props. So I don't think it's a one and done thing, but flexibility, I think, is going to be key, and we've already kind of evolved that in ways that we never had to pre-pandemic. So I think that's one of the big ones.
Q, if you choose to come to Ireland, you are more than welcome, and we hope to welcome you sometime soon, Q. Q, thank you so much for joining us. And again, would you please pass on our credit to your team and all you've done?
Definitely.
And again, it's an amazing story, and I wish you every success in the next stage of the adventure. Q, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Have a good one. Bye.
You too, Q. Thank you.